Sundar Pichai was sitting alone in the small meeting room, his hands resting on the table, a single notebook in front of him. Outside the glass wall, the office buzzed with people moving quickly, voices blending into a low hum. But inside the room, there was only silence and the soft ticking of the clock. He had been waiting for Bill Campbell for the last 20 minutes, rehearsing in his head the questions he wanted to ask, the advice he hoped to receive. Sundar had been struggling with a difficult decision for weeks, something that would affect not just his career, but the lives of many people in the company. He thought Bill would come in and give him a clear answer, as he always seemed to do. For others, the stories about Bill were famous: how he could solve a problem with just one sentence, how his words stayed with people for years. Sundar needed that kind of wisdom now. His project was in trouble, his team was losing confidence, and investors were starting to ask questions. It felt like everything was slipping away, and he didn't know how to pull it back together. The door finally opened, and Bill walked in. He was wearing his usual sweater, moving slowly, but with a kind of presence that filled the room. He didn't rush, didn't look distracted. His eyes found Sundar immediately, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at him, his face calm but warm, as if he already understood everything without being told. Sundar started to speak, ready to explain the whole situation, but the words stuck in his throat. There was something about Bill's expression. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't judgment. It was something else, a quiet kindness, a look that seemed to say, "You already know what to do. You just need to believe it." The silence between them stretched on, and Sundar felt the tension in his chest slowly loosen. It was strange. He had come here for advice, but Bill had not said a single word. Instead, he pulled out a chair, sat down, and simply listened. Sundar talked. He talked about the failed deadlines, the arguments in the team, the fear of disappointing people. He admitted things he hadn't even told his closest friends, that he was starting to doubt himself, that he wondered if he was the right person for this job at all. Bill didn't interrupt. He didn't give instructions. He just let Sundar speak until the weight seemed lighter. When Sundar finally stopped, Bill leaned forward slightly, still looking at him with the same steady eyes. In that moment, Sundar realized something. He didn't need a solution handed to him. He didn't need someone to take away the problem. What he needed was the belief that he could face it. Bill's look gave him that. It was like a quiet voice inside his head saying, "You are capable. You are ready. Trust yourself." When the meeting ended, Bill stood, gave Sundar a small pat on the shoulder, and left the room without saying more than a few casual words. But the silence had already spoken volumes. Sundar walked out into the hallway, and for the first time in weeks, he felt steady. He knew the next steps he needed to take. He knew the conversations he had to have with his team. He also knew that the most powerful kind of leadership wasn't always about giving orders or answers. Sometimes, it was about creating space for someone to find their own strength. That day, Sundar realized Bill's greatest gift wasn't advice. It was presence. It was the way he made you feel seen, understood, and capable, even when you doubted yourself. And as Sundar stepped back into his office, ready to face the challenges ahead, he knew he would carry that look with him forever. The morning after his meeting with Bill, Sundar woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, and the city outside his apartment was still quiet. But his mind was already awake, turning over the things he needed to do. He made coffee, sat at his kitchen table, and opened his notebook. The first page was blank, but in his head, the plan was beginning to take shape. For weeks, he had been avoiding hard conversations with his team. He had been hoping the problems would fix themselves, or that someone else would step forward with answers. But now, after that silent meeting with Bill, Sundar knew that the responsibility was his. Leadership wasn't just about celebrating victory. It was about facing the uncomfortable moments, the kind that tested your courage and patience. He arrived at the office before most people. The corridors felt different in the early morning, almost peaceful. In the meeting room, he set up a simple whiteboard with 3 words written in large letters: trust, focus, unity. These weren't just words for decoration. They were the foundation of what he wanted to rebuild. When the team filed in, they looked tired and uncertain. Some avoided eye contact, others glanced at each other as if expecting another session, filled with criticism or blame. Sundar stood at the front, not holding any reports or slides, just the marker in his hand. He took a slow breath and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "We have made mistakes," he began. "We've missed deadlines, and we've lost some of the trust of those who depend on us. But that's not the end of our story. We can fix this together." The room was silent. A few people shifted in their chairs. Sundar continued, telling them he wasn't here to point fingers. He was here to listen, to understand what was going wrong, and to make sure they found a way forward as one team. At first the responses were hesitant. People mentioned small technical issues or delays, but avoided deeper problems. Sundar remembered how Bill had listened to him without judgment, and he decided to do the same. He asked open questions. He gave people time to speak. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. There were communication gaps. Some teams didn't know what the others were working on. Deadlines were set without understanding the workload. And worst of all, people were starting to feel like their efforts didn't matter, that the bigger goals were out of reach. Instead of reacting with frustration, Sundar thanked them for their honesty. He wrote down each problem on the board, making sure no one felt ignored. By the end of the meeting, the board was full of issues, but it was also full of ideas for solutions. The energy in the room was shifting. As the team left, one engineer stayed behind. He was one of the quietest members of the group, someone who rarely spoke up in meetings. He walked up to Sundar and said softly, "I don't know what changed, but it feels like we're finally being heard." Those words stayed with Sundar. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. That evening, as he packed his things, Sundar thought again about Bill's look, the one that had told him to believe in himself. Now, he was passing that same belief onto his team. He didn't need to control every decision or solve every problem himself. He just needed to guide them, to make them feel trusted and valued. He knew the road ahead would still be hard. There would be more pressure from investors, more challenges to overcome. But now, they had something they hadn't had before: unity. And that was the kind of strength that could turn a failing project into a success. 2 weeks had passed since Sundar had started rebuilding his team's trust. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. People were speaking more openly, helping one another, and taking ownership of their work. Deadlines were being approached with less panic and more focus. But just as things were beginning to feel steady, a new challenge appeared, one that could undo everything they had worked for. It began with a single email from the investors. The message was polite, but the meaning was sharp. They wanted results, and they wanted them fast. The next product milestone had to be hit within 30 days, or funding for the project might be cut. Sundar read the email twice, feeling the weight of each word. 30 days was almost impossible. The product was still in testing, with several major issues unresolved. Rushing it could lead to mistakes, and mistakes could damage their reputation. For years that evening, Sundar sat alone in the office, long after everyone had gone home. He stared at the whiteboard, still filled with the words, trust, focus, unity. He knew the team had started believing in themselves again, but now he had to protect that belief. If he pushed them too hard, it might break. If he didn't push it all, they might lose the project entirely. He thought back to Bill. What would Bill say if he were here? Maybe he wouldn't give instructions at all. Maybe he'd just look at Sundar the same way he did before, minding him to trust his instincts. The next morning, Sundar called the entire team together. He told them the truth about the email. There were no sugar-coated words, no hiding the pressure they were under. "We have 30 days, he said, "and I know that sounds impossible, but I believe we can do it without losing what we've built here. We're not going to panic. We're going to plan." They worked out a new schedule, breaking the massive task into smaller, daily goals. They paired experienced members with newer ones so no one felt overwhelmed. Every evening, they met for 10 minutes to share updates and small wins, keeping morale high. Still, the pressure was real. The days felt longer, the nights shorter. Sundar could see the tiredness in people's faces, but he also saw something else, a determination he hadn't seen before. One night, near midnight, Sundar was walking through the office when he saw a junior developer asleep at her desk. She had been struggling with a difficult part of the code for days. Instead of waking her, Sundar left a note beside her keyboard. "Thank you for giving so much of yourself to this project. We will get there together." The next morning, she came into his office, holding the note in her hand. "I've never had a leader write something like this," she said quietly. "It means more than you know." As the days passed, the team began hitting their smaller targets. Bugs were fixed, designs improved, and slowly, the impossible deadline began to feel reachable. Yet, deep down, Sundar knew that success wasn't just about meeting the deadline. It was about making sure his team still trusted him and themselves when it was over. He could feel the storm building, but he also knew that storms could clear the air, making way for the sunrise. The final week before the deadline arrived, and the office felt like a different world. The lights stayed on late into the night, the hum of computers never stopped, and the smell of coffee seemed to fill every corner. People worked with an intensity that was both inspiring and exhausting. Sundar moved quietly from desk to desk, checking on progress, answering questions, and offering encouragement. But pressure has a way of finding the cracks. On a Wednesday afternoon, during what was supposed to be a routine progress meeting, two team members began arguing. It started smaller, disagreement about which features should take priority, but the voices grew sharper. Soon, frustration that had been building for days came pouring out. Complaints about workload, about decisions made weeks earlier, even about each other's commitment. The room went silent when one of them stood up, grabbed his laptop, and walked out. Sundar followed him into the hallway. The man, a senior engineer who had been with the company for years, turned and said, "I'm done, Sundar. This isn't worth the stress anymore. I've given everything, and it's still not enough." For a moment, Sundar didn't know what to say. He could feel the weight of the deadline pressing on him too. But he thought of Bill again, the way he had listened without rushing to fix things. So Sundar just stood there, letting the man speak. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You're right, it's been hard. Harder than it should be. And I can't promise the next few days will be easier. But you're one of the reasons we've come this far. If you walk away now, we might still finish. But it won't be the same. We'll lose more than just your skills. We'll lose your belief in what we're doing." The man didn't answer right away. He looked down at the floor, then back at Sundar. "You really think we can do it?" "I do," Sundar said. "And if you don't believe it yet, borrow my belief until you find yours again." Something in those words seemed to land. The man nodded slowly, and they walked back into the meeting room together. The next few days tested everyone. There were nights when the code broke and had to be rewritten from scratch. Designs were revised at the last minute. One shipment of key hardware was delayed, forcing them to improvise. Through it all, Sundar stayed calm, reminding the team that every obstacle was just another step toward the finish line. On the final night before the deadline, the whole team gathered around one computer as the last test ran. The progress bar inched forward, every second feeling longer than the last. When the final confirmation popped up, test pass cheers filled the room. Some people hugged, others just sank back into their chairs, exhausted but smiling. It wasn't just relief. It was pride. Sundar looked around at their faces. He thought about the first meeting when no one wanted to speak, when doubt had hung heavy in the air. Now that doubt was gone. They had built more than a product, they had built each other up. The next morning, the office was quieter than it had been in weeks. Some team members came in late, still recovering from the long nights, while others walked in with tired smiles. Sundar arrived early, carrying 2 large boxes of breakfast pastries and coffee. It wasn't much, but he wanted to show them that their hard work was seen and appreciated. They had met the deadline. The product was complete, tested, and ready. Now it was in the hands of the investors. The final decision whether they would continue funding the project would be announced at a review meeting later that afternoon. The hours before the meeting felt like waiting for the results of an exam. Everyone tried to keep busy, but the tension was there. Sundar could feel it in the way conversations stopped when someone from management walked by, or in the way people kept checking their phones as if an early message might come through. At 2 p.m., Sundar and 2 senior engineers walked into the conference room where the investors were gathered. The large screen displayed charts, timelines, and the finished product demo. Sundar spoke clearly, walking them through each stage of the process, highlighting the challenges they had faced and how the team had overcome them. He didn't hide the difficulties, they were part of the story, proof of resilience. When the presentation ended, there was a pause. One of the investors leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "It's impressive," he said slowly, "but tell me, Sundar, why should we believe this project will succeed long term?" The question hung in the air. Sundar thought about numbers and projections, but then he remembered the real reason. He thought of the faces of his team, the arguments they had survived, the late nights, the quiet moments of encouragement. Because, Sundar said, we're not just delivering a product. We've built a team that refuses to give up. This project isn't running on funding alone. It's running on trust, commitment, and belief in each other. And that doesn't end when a deadline passes. There was a silence. Then, slowly, the investor nodded. "We'll continue," he said. "Full funding approved." Relief washed over Sue. He shook their hands, thanked them, and left the room. Outside, he found his team waiting. He didn't need to say anything. The smile on his face told them everything. Cheers erupted, and someone suggested they all go out to celebrate that evening. They gathered at a small restaurant near the office. For the first time in months, there were no laptops on the table, no half-finished coffee cups, just laughter, shared stories, and a sense of belonging. As the night went on, Sundar stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The air was cool, the streets lit with the warm glow of streetlights. He thought again about Bill, how one look, one moment of kindness, had set all of this in motion. A week later, the office had returned to a steady rhythm. There were still deadlines and meetings, but the atmosphere was lighter now, grounded in trust rather than fear. The team had proven to themselves that they could face pressure and still come out stronger. One afternoon, Sundar received a message that Bill Campbell was visiting the campus. It had been months since their last meeting, the silent one that had changed everything. Sundar didn't know if Bill even remembered it, but he wanted to see him, to tell him how much that moment had meant. When Sundar walked into the lounge, Bill was sitting with a cup of tea, speaking to someone from another department. When he noticed Sundar, he gave the same calm smile as before. Sundar sat down, and for a moment, they just exchanged small talk. Then Sundar leaned forward. "Bill," he said, "do you remember that day in the meeting room when I came to you for advice, and you didn't say anything? You just looked at me." Bill chuckled softly. "I remember." "That look," Sundar said quietly, "changed everything for me. I was lost. I thought I needed answers from you, but what I really needed was to believe I could find them myself. You gave me that." Bill nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "words get in the way. If I had told you what to do, it would have been my path, not yours. but if you find it yourself, it's yours to keep. Sundar thought about that. He realized that over the past month, he had done the same for his team. He hadn't handed them solutions, he had made space for them to find their own. As the conversation ended, Bill stood up, gave Sundar a gentle pat on the shoulder, and left, just as he had before. There were no dramatic speeches, no long advice, only a quiet presence that left a lasting mark. Over the next few days, Sundar began noticing subtle changes in himself. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke. When team members brought him problems, he asked them questions instead of giving quick fixes. He saw them grow in confidence, just as he had. One Friday evening, as everyone was leaving, the junior developer, who had once found his note by her keyboard, stopped by his desk. She smiled and said, "I just wanted to thank you. Working here has made me believe I can do more than I ever thought possible." After she left, Sundar sat for a while in the empty office. He realized that this was what leadership truly meant: not being the smartest in the room, not having all the answers, but making others believe in their own ability to rise. He thought about the journey from that first silent meeting with Bill to now. It had started with one kind look and had grown into something much bigger. Chain of belief passed from one person to another. Months passed, and the project that had once seemed impossible was now one of the company's proudest successes. It had not only met its goals, but was being praised by users, investors, and even competitors. The team was stronger than ever, moving with confidence and trust that seemed unshakable. But Sundar knew that success was never the end. It was only the start of the next challenge. One morning, he was called into a meeting with upper management. A new initiative was starting, bigger than anything they had done before, and they wanted Sundar to lead it. It would require assembling a fresh team from multiple departments, including people who had never worked together and who were already carrying doubts about whether the project could be done at all. As Sundar walked out of that meeting, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. It was just like the situation he had faced months ago: pressure, uncertainty, and the risk of failure. But this time, there was no hesitation in him. He had walked that road before, and he knew what truly made the difference. He began meeting with the new team in small groups. Instead of jumping straight into tasks, he listened to their concerns. He didn't try to impress them with a grand vision right away. Instead, he focused on building trust. He remembered Bill's words about letting people find their own path, and he applied them here. Some days were slow, and some were frustrating. There were disagreements, doubts, and moments when people questioned whether the goal was even realistic. But Sundar stayed steady, giving them space to think, to contribute, and to own their work. One evening, after a long day, he stayed back in the office. The sun had set, and the floor was almost empty. He walked past a conference room and saw two members of the new team sitting together, laughing while sketching ideas on a whiteboard. They were solving a problem, without being told how, as his previous team had learned to do. And in that moment, Sundar realized something. Leadership wasn't about being at the center of every success. It was about starting a ripple that kept moving outward, touching people long after you stepped away. Weeks later, as the new project gained momentum, Sundar received a short email from Bill. It had no long sentences, no formal advice. Just 5 words: "You're passing it on." Well, Sundar read it twice, smiling. He thought back to that first meeting, the one where Bill had said nothing, but still given him everything. Now, he was doing the same for others. The circle had closed. What had begun as one silent look had grown into a chain of belief that would outlast any single project or product. As he left the office that night, the city lights stretched out before him, bright and endless. And Sundar knew that somewhere, someday, someone else would be in a quiet room, unsure of themselves, looking for answers. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find them in the same way he had, not through words, but through the unshakable kindness of someone who believed in them.